The morning rain drummed softly against the windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery as Karis Monroe arranged freshly baked cupcakes in the display case. Each one was crowned with a tiny sugar violet, her signature touch. These early hours were her favorite, before customers arrived, when the world was quiet and she could think, breathe, and savor the warm scent of vanilla and cinnamon that filled the shop. At exactly 7:30 the phone rang, an unusual sound at that hour. Customers rarely called so early. "Hello, this is Karis," she said, cradling the receiver between her shoulder and ear while continuing to adjust the tray. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe. This is Barclay Quinn from Quinn Owen and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of your godmother, Miss Aries Holloway." Karis froze. Aries had passed away 3 weeks earlier after a long battle with cancer. Karis had attended the funeral, then buried herself in work, trying not to think about the fact that she would never again see the woman who had been more of a mother to her than anyone else in her life. "Yes, of course," she said quietly. "What can I do for you? Ms. Holloway left you an inheritance. We need to meet to complete the paperwork. It's rather urgent given the nature of the assets." "Assets?" Karis repeated, confused. "I don't understand. Aries never mentioned anything like that." There was a brief pause on the line. "Your godmother left you her restaurant, Ms. Monroe. The Legacy Crown." Karis's hand trembled and one of the cupcakes slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. The Legacy Crown was the most prestigious restaurant in Atlanta, frequented by politicians, celebrities, and business moguls. Aries had built it over 30 years, turning a small cafe into a legendary institution. "There must be some mistake," Karis whispered. "No mistake," Mr. Quinn replied. "Miss Holloway was very clear. She considered you like a daughter and believed you were the only person who could preserve what she built." Less than an hour later, Karis sat in Mr. Quinn's office, staring at the documents that confirmed it. She was now the owner of the Legacy Crown, a restaurant worth several $1 million, and her life had just changed forever. Aries had known about her illness for more than a year, the lawyer explained gently, and she had used that time to plan every detail with great care. Along with the restaurant, she had arranged the wine supply business, agreements with vendors, and clear instructions to protect the staff, leaving nothing to chance. She had also written a personal letter, and when Karis took the envelope, her hands shook as she saw the words, "To my dearest Karis," written in Aries's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. She asked if she could take it home, and the lawyer agreed, reminding her that the legal transfer still had to be completed in the next few days because the restaurant couldn't stay without leadership for long. Karis nodded, still feeling like she was walking in a dream, and memories came rushing back. Her first day in the Legacy Crown's kitchen at 9 years old, her mother working there as a pastry chef until she passed away when Karis was 14, and how Aries had then stepped in, paid for her schooling, and patiently taught her everything about baking and running a kitchen. Aries used to tell her she had a natural gift and a warm heart, and those words echoed in her mind as she signed the papers without even realizing it. By the time Karis got home, it was already noon, and she hoped to read the letter quietly before her husband Jarvis returned, but his car was already in the driveway. They had met 6 years earlier at a charity event where she handled the desserts, and he had fallen in love after tasting her lavender and honey cake, and a year later they were married. When she walked inside, she heard his tense voice call her name and found him sitting on the sofa with a glass in his hand, something unusual for that time of day. She asked what was wrong and why he wasn't at work, and he looked up at her with a worried expression that replaced his usual confidence and said his mother had called and asked if it was true that she had inherited the Legacy Crown. Karis froze, realizing the news had already reached him even though she hadn't told anyone yet. And in that moment she knew her life was about to change in ways she still couldn't fully imagine. Jarvis drained his glass and looked at her in disbelief, saying he couldn't understand how the news was true and why she hadn't told him, and Karis explained that she had just come back from the lawyer and planned to talk to him that evening, but the news had already spread because his mother was friends with the wife of one of the restaurant's waiters, and everyone was shocked that Aries had left such a famous place to her instead of to a manager or head chef. Karis felt her face warm because she knew how strange it must sound, a woman who owned a small bakery suddenly becoming the owner of one of the best restaurants in the city, and she tried to explain that Aries was her godmother and they had been very close. Jarvis began walking back and forth, saying she didn't seem to understand what this really meant, because this wasn't a tiny shop with a few tables but a huge business worth millions. Holding the envelope with Aries' letter, Karis admitted it was a big step, but said she believed she could handle it because Aries had taught her so much and she was ready to learn the rest. Jarvis stopped in front of her and said she should be realistic, that making great cakes was not the same as running a large restaurant with staff, supplies and finances, and when she calmly said she would learn, he rubbed his head in frustration and said his mother thought the whole thing was a bad idea and he agreed. The mention of his mother made Karis tense, because she had never accepted her and always spoke about her job as if it were something small and unimportant. So Karis asked what his mother had to do with this, trying to stay calm. Jarvis avoided her eyes and said she was coming for dinner to talk about the situation. And when Karis asked if he meant her inheritance, he corrected her and said it was theirs because they were married, and those words hurt her deeply. For 6 years he had shown no real interest in her work, treating her bakery like a simple hobby, and now that something valuable was involved, everything suddenly became ours. That evening, the house was filled with the strong scent of his mother's expensive perfume as she walked in without knocking as usual. Announcing herself in her confident, familiar way, Tamsin arrived looking tall, polished, and much younger than her age, greeting Karis with a quick, overly cheerful kiss on the cheek and acting amazed by the news. Karis tried to smile and said it was unexpected, while Tamsin casually commented that Aries had always been a bit unusual and then walked into the living room as if she already belonged there, tossing her coat to Jarvis and repeating old stories she had only heard from her social circle. Karis stayed quiet, knowing Tamsin had never truly known Aries and only knew her through gossip. At dinner, instead of asking Karis how she felt, Tamsin turned to her son and confidently explained that she had already spoken to a financial advisor and that the restaurant business was doing very well, so they had to act quickly, especially with a famous place like the Legacy Crown. When Karis asked who this advisor was, Tamsin waved it off and said it didn't matter, then announced there were only 2 choices: sell the restaurant while it was still at its peak or let her take charge of it herself. Karis was so surprised she nearly spilled her drink and Tamsin laughed, saying she used to work as an accountant before marriage and had always dreamed of owning a restaurant, even though she had never mentioned this before. When Karis pointed that out, Tamsin shrugged and said there was no reason to talk about it until now, then pushed Jarvis to agree. Jarvis, clearly uncomfortable, said his mother understood money and he could help with the technical side like websites and bookings. When Karis quietly reminded them that Aries had left the restaurant to her, Tamsin patted her hand and said in a sweet but dismissive way that Karis could still be part of things by taking care of the desserts, making it clear they already saw the business as something they planned to control. Tamsin quickly added that running a business was a different story and that it needed real experience and strong connections, which made Karis think about the unopened letter from Aries in her bag and regret not reading it sooner. She said she needed time because this was a life-changing decision, and although Tamsin smiled and agreed, her cold eyes made it clear she wanted a fast answer and reminded her that business never waits. After Tamsin finally left, Karis locked herself in the bathroom, the only quiet place in the house, and opened Aries' letter with shaking hands, reading words filled with love and trust, where Aries explained she was leaving her the restaurant not because there was no one else, but because Karis was the only one she truly believed in, praising her care, hard work, and the way she brought joy to people, and reminding her that she herself had started with nothing but the will to learn. The letter also said the staff, including the longtime chef and the experienced manager, were ready to help her, and that some important details were kept with the lawyer in case Karis needed support. Holding the letter to her chest and wiping away her tears, Karis felt stronger and more certain she could not give up. But when she stepped out, she found Jarvis waiting with documents and calmly told her it was a power of attorney so his mother could manage the restaurant for now. And as Karis looked at the papers and then at her husband, she couldn't help but remember the man who once believed in her talent and praised her dreams. Karis suddenly wondered when everything had gone so wrong, or if she had simply refused to see that her husband had always lived under his mother's control, and with a calm but steady voice she said she would not sign the papers. Jarvis reacted with anger, saying she was being difficult and insisting she could never manage such a big place, claiming his mother only wanted to help. But Karis felt her strength growing and reminded him that Aries had trusted her for a reason. When Jarvis spoke badly about Aries and said she had used Karis and left her with a problem instead of a gift, Karis raised her voice for the first time in their marriage and told him to stop, explaining he knew nothing about what Aries meant to her. He answered by pointing out her small bakery and warning her that people would laugh if they knew who owned such a famous restaurant. And his words slowly broke her confidence until she started to doubt herself. Feeling trapped and pressured, she asked for time, but Jarvis said there was none and hinted that things would get difficult if she didn't agree, and as always she gave in and said she would sign, but only for 1 month and only if she was told about every decision. Jarvis quickly agreed and handed her the pen, and just as she was about to sign, thinking of Ares's encouraging smile and words, the phone suddenly rang, making her drop the pen in shock. Jarvis said he would answer the phone, clearly upset by the interruption, and while he was gone, Karis finally took a closer look at the papers and realized the document gave Tamsin full control over the restaurant with no time limit at all, which meant this was not temporary help but a complete handover. When Jarvis came back, he claimed his mother had spoken to the head chef and said the man would quit if a decision wasn't made by the next day, but Karis knew that wasn't true because the chef had always been loyal to Ares and would never make such threats. In that moment, something inside her finally snapped after years of being talked down to and treated like she didn't matter, and she said a clear and steady no. When Jarvis stepped toward her in anger, she told him firmly that she would not sign and that the restaurant was hers because Ares had trusted her with it. Jarvis shouted that she would destroy everything, but Karis calmly replied that even if she failed, it would be her own choice and her own responsibility. Furious, Jarvis grabbed his phone and called his mother, and Karis understood that their marriage had just changed forever, yet she felt strangely at peace. Tamsin arrived less than half an hour later, bursting into the house and speaking sharply, saying Karis was acting on emotions and that this was not the time for feelings, while Karis simply stood there and listened in silence, already knowing she would not back down. For 6 long years, Karis had tried her best to win Tamsin's approval, ignoring her control over Jarvis and pretending not to see how she was being pushed around, but that day she finally spoke up and calmly said she had made her choice and would run the restaurant herself. Tamsin laughed and told her to be sensible, saying a famous place like the Legacy Crown was too big and too complicated for someone who only baked, and warned that one small mistake could ruin everything. Karis replied that this was exactly why she would not hand it over, which made Tamsin turn to Jarvis and demand he talk some sense into his wife. Jarvis hesitated, but Karis stood firm and said Ares had trusted her and she would learn with the help of the staff, even if it was hard. Tamsin mocked the idea, saying the workers would never respect her, but Karis said she was ready to take that risk and tried to leave. Jarvis stopped her, then suddenly grabbed the documents from the table and, despite Karis protesting, handed them to his mother, telling her to take over. Tamsin accepted them with a pleased smile, and Karis felt her heart break as she realized her own husband had given away her inheritance without her permission, and even though she knew the papers were in her name, Tamsin claimed it was allowed and made it clear she had no intention of giving them back. Karis stared at Jarvis, searching for the man she had once loved, but all she saw was a stranger with a hard, self-satisfied expression. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "I don't think so," he replied casually. "In a month you'll thank us when you see how well Mom runs the restaurant." Karis quietly gathered her purse and jacket. "Where are you going?" Jarvis asked, a flicker of concern in his voice. She gave him a small, calm smile. "To my bakery. I have a lot of orders to prepare for tomorrow." Stepping into the cool Atlanta night, scented with the promise of rain, she felt an unexpected calm. She wasn't crushed by anger or betrayal, only quietly determined. There was no way she wanted to return home to where Jarvis and Tamsin were likely celebrating their victory. She walked to Sweet Dreams Bakery, her sanctuary, the place where she truly felt herself. Inside the small shop, the familiar aromas of vanilla and cinnamon greeted her, comforting and grounding. She flipped on the lights, taking in the cozy space. For tables, a display of desserts, a small kitchen tucked behind a frosted partition. It lacked the grandeur of the Legacy Crown, but it had warmth, home, and control. Pulling out her phone, she dialed a number she rarely called but had always kept handy. Barclay Quinn answered on the third ring. "Mr. Quinn, this is Karis Monroe. I'm sorry to call so late." "Not at all, Ms. Monroe. What's wrong?" Karis exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "The restaurant deeds. My husband took them and gave them to his mother. They think they have the right to manage it." Barclay's voice sharpened instantly. "You're saying he took the property deeds without your consent?" "Yes. He claimed they were marital property." Barclay chuckled, a reassuring edge in his tone. "They're not. Inheritances aren't considered marital property under Georgia law unless explicitly stated in a will. Don't worry. We have copies of all documents and the originals are properly registered. No matter what your husband or his mother tries, they cannot change the ownership without your notarized signature. Relief washed over Karis, the weight on her shoulders finally lifting slightly. She could still reclaim what was hers, and for the first time that night she felt a spark of hope. Karis took a steadying breath. "So I'm still the legal owner of the restaurant?" she asked. "Absolutely," Barkley replied. "But if anyone tries to act on your behalf without permission, it could create complications. I suggest we meet first thing tomorrow to go over the next steps." "Agreed," Karis said quietly. Also in her letter, Aries mentioned that not all documents and assets were handed over to me today. She said there are details only you know about them. A brief pause followed on the line. "Yes, that's correct," Barkley finally said. Miss Holloway anticipated potential issues. "Let's meet at my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. before the business day starts and go through everything in detail." That night, Karis slept on a small couch in the bakery's back room, keeping her phone off to avoid any calls from Jarvis once he realized she hadn't returned home. The next morning she arrived at Barkley Quinn's office carrying a paper bag filled with warm croissants, a comforting ritual before any important meeting. Barkley, a tall, lean man with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, stood to greet her. "Please have a seat," he said, accepting a croissant from Karis with a grateful smile. "Incredible," he muttered after the first bite. "Now I see why Aries thought so highly of you." Karis got straight to the point. What exactly did Aries foresee in her letter? And which assets was she referring to? Barkley wiped his hands on a napkin and opened a file drawer. She knew about her illness for over a year and used that time to carefully organize the business. He pulled out a file and began to explain. "The Legacy Crown isn't just a restaurant. There's the building which you now own, the brand and reputation, but other assets are arranged separately. The wine supplier, valued over $200,000, is a separate legal entity controlled by a trust, and you are the sole beneficiary. The kitchen equipment is leased through another company, also under your control. Contracts with main vendors are in the name of Aries Holloway and Associates, where you're listed as signing partner." Karis listened in stunned silence. "Why such a complicated setup?" she asked. Barkley smiled knowingly. Aries was not only a brilliant chef but also a shrewd businesswoman. This structure optimized taxes, yes, but more importantly, it now protects the restaurant's most valuable assets from anyone trying to interfere. Everything she built is secure, and it's all in your hands. Karis took a deep breath. "My husband and my mother-in-law," she started, but Barkley interrupted gently. "I don't usually comment on family matters, but Aries wanted to make sure you'd be fully protected no matter what." He slid another document across the desk, a list of the Legacy Crown's key staff with their contact details. Chef Bram Cassidy and manager Nita Price were at the top, the people Aries trusted completely. Karis felt her throat tighten. Even in death, her godmother had thought of everything, protecting her from every angle. "What should I do now?" she asked quietly. Barkley explained that she could claim the restaurant immediately, but it might be wiser to wait and observe what Jarvis and Tamsin did. Acting rashly without the power of attorney could be considered fraud. Karis paused, torn between rushing to assert her rights and taking a more measured approach. Finally she decided, "I'll wait, but I want to meet with Bram and Nita first. I need to know what's really happening at the restaurant." After leaving the lawyer's office she returned to the bakery, throwing herself into the familiar rhythm of baking, serving customers and taking orders, a comforting normalcy that kept her grounded. Around dusk Franklin, the friendly local mail carrier, stopped by as he often did. "Karis, dear," he said, smiling as he headed to the counter, "one of your special muffins, please." As he savored the treat, Karis asked casually, "Franklin, you deliver downtown, right? Isn't the Legacy Crown on your route?" "Sure is," he nodded. "It's a lovely place. I'm so sorry about Aries. Bless her memory, she was remarkable." Karis smiled faintly. "Yes. Listen, I need to get a message to Chef Bram Cassidy. Can you help?" Franklin's eyes twinkled. "For you, Karis, anything is possible, especially if the message comes with a muffin." An hour later her phone buzzed with a short note from Bram, relayed by Franklin. Jackson Bridge, 7 p.m. sharp. Exactly at 7, Karis stood on the bridge, watching the slow flow of the Chattahoochee River, ready for the next step in reclaiming her godmother's legacy. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air cool and damp. "Ms. Monroe," a deep, gravelly voice called, making her turn. Standing before her was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, his short graying hair and piercing blue eyes giving him a sharp, experienced look. His hands were rough and scarred from years of work in the kitchen. "Mr. Cassidy," Karis said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." He shook it firmly. "Call me Bram. Let's take a walk. I'd rather we're not seen together." They moved slowly along the waterfront as Bram recounted the last 24 hours. "Your mother-in-law arrived this morning with your husband, claiming she's the new owner. She showed me some papers but I didn't examine them. Eris warned me this might happen. She told Nita and me to trust only you." Karis listened intently. "And the staff?" she asked. Bram frowned. Cautious but uneasy. "Most of us have been with Eris for years. Sudden changes unsettle people." He hesitated. "First thing she did was fire Liam, the sous chef, saying he was too expensive. He's been here 10 years and knows the menu inside out. She offered a severance but it was clear, her mind was made up. Then she announced budget cuts, wanting to remove some wine list specialties she thought were unnecessary and costly. Nita tried to explain the importance of our regulars and long-standing reservations, but she insisted a fresh business approach mattered more than tradition." They paused at the parapet looking down at the water. Bram turned to her, his tone serious. "Eris trusted you, Ms. Monroe. She always said you had a special gift. Not just feeding people but creating experiences, memories. That's rare." Karis felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure I deserve such praise." Bram's eyes met hers firmly. "Eris didn't give compliments lightly. You have what it takes and she believed in you completely. If Eris thought you could handle it then you can," Bram said firmly. Karis took a deep breath. "So what's happening now?" she asked. "Tamsin and Miss Niles are making all the changes," Bram explained. "How long will the staff hold out?" Karis pressed. He shrugged. "It's hard to say. Some, like Liam, have already left. Others are watching and waiting. Nidita's holding firm but it's difficult for her. As for me, I'm too old and stubborn to bend. Still, for many of us the legacy crown isn't just a job. It's the family Eris built. We don't want to see it ruined." They exchanged contacts and Bram promised to keep her updated. The next day, Karis met with Nita Price, an elegant woman in her 50s who had managed the restaurant almost since it opened. They met at a quiet cafe outside the city, where Nita explained the full situation. "She's fired anyone who even questions her," Nita said, nervously stirring her tea. "The wine list is cut, the most expensive dishes removed, and the seafood supplier replaced with a company owned by her friend. Bram is furious. The quality has dropped but prices stay the same." Karis's eyes widened. "And the customers?" Nita sighed. "The regulars notice. Some have already cancelled. Judge Fitzgerald, who dined here every Friday for 15 years, walked out without finishing his meal yesterday. He said it wasn't the crown he knew." Karis felt a sinking feeling, realizing Eris's decades of work were unraveling. Then Nita's face brightened. "One thing is interesting. Ms. Niles ordered half the wine collection sold to optimize assets. But when Edward, the sommelier, tried to access the cellar he couldn't. The wine cellar isn't technically part of the restaurant's assets." Karis absorbed every word, knowing the fight to reclaim her restaurant had just begun. And how did Tamsin react? She threw a tantrum demanding immediate access to every asset, but Edward insisted he could only deal with the registered owner of the wine collection. Nidita leaned closer and whispered, "That's you, Ms. Monroe, plus the right to sign most of the vendor contracts." Aries really planned everything. 6 days after Tamsin's takeover, Karis was closing the bakery when the doorbell rang. Jarvis walked in looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. "I finally found you," he said. "I wasn't hiding," Karis replied calmly, continuing to wipe down tables. "I've been here the whole time. You didn't answer your phone. You didn't come home. I'm sleeping on the couch in the back room. It's quite comfortable." Jarvis looked startled at her calmness. "Look, I know you're upset but we have to talk. Things have gotten complicated." Karis raised an eyebrow. "Complicated? In what sense? The restaurant, he said. Mom's made changes and not everyone is happy. Especially Chef Bram, he's sabotaging her orders. And Nidita keeps referring to a contract that supposedly can't be changed without your signature. Not supposedly, Karis corrected firmly. Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, uneasy. I know what Mom and I did wasn't right, but we had good intentions. Now we need your help. Talk to the staff and tell them Mom is acting on your behalf. Karis looked him directly in the eye. She is not. I never authorized Tamsin to act for me. Taking the documents doesn't give her legal rights. In the days that followed, the restaurant situation worsened. Reports from Bram and Nidita revealed that Tamsin had completely overhauled the menu, replacing gourmet dishes with cheaper, simpler options. She fired 3 more employees, including a sommelier who challenged her plan to sell part of the wine collection. Loyal customers began canceling reservations, and local media started asking what had happened to the once celebrated legacy crown. Through it all, Karis remained calm, focusing on her bakery, meeting with former staff and strategizing with her lawyer, yet she deliberately held back from confronting Tamsin directly for now. Why don't you step in? Bram asked during another secret meeting, his frustration barely contained. She's destroying everything Aries built. Karis nodded quietly. I know, she replied softly. But sometimes, you have to let people hang themselves with their own mistakes. 10 days after taking over the legacy crown, Tamsin made a critical error. She refused service to a state representative who had been a loyal customer for over 20 years, just to accommodate a local businessman friend with a sketchy reputation. The scandal exploded immediately. The representative posted angrily on social media, reporters picked it up, and by evening the legacy crown was at the center of a media storm. Patrons and the public demanded to know what had happened to the legendary restaurant after Aries Holloway's passing. That same night, Bram, unable to compromise his standards, resigned, refusing to cook cheap, frozen dishes at inflated prices. 4 other skilled cooks left with him. Without a head chef and half the kitchen staff, with reservations cancelled and reputation damaged, the restaurant teetered on the brink of collapse. Tamsin, inexperienced in running such an establishment, had no idea how to manage the crisis. Only then did Jarvis finally see the truth. His mother wasn't saving the legacy crown, she was destroying it with impulsive decisions and a hunger for control. The next day the restaurant opened late. Tamsin strutted around in a bright pink suit, clashing with Aries's elegant interior of muted tones and dark wood. I don't see the problem, she declared to the remaining staff in the dining room. If one cook leaves, we'll find another. Atlanta has plenty of people who can cook. Nita Price, still clinging to her role as manager, spoke carefully. Ms. Niles, Bram isn't just any cook. He's a Michelin-starred chef who's been here 15 years. Many customers come specifically for his dishes. Tamsin waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. People come for the reputation, the ambience. The star chef isn't important. As long as the food is presentable, that's all that matters. No one dared to speak up. The staff exchanged worried looks, silently realizing their worst fears were coming true. The new owner had no understanding of fine dining or the delicate balance that had kept the legacy crown's reputation intact for decades. Tamsin continued barking orders. Robert will handle the chef duties today. Keep the menu simple. Only the most popular dishes and no fancy French names. People need to know what they're ordering. Robert, a young chef with just 3 years of experience, turned pale. He was talented, but not ready to manage a prestigious restaurant kitchen on his own. Miss Niles, I'm not sure I can handle the head chef role. Maybe we should close temporarily and find a professional replacement for Bram, he said hesitantly. Tamsin's eyes narrowed. Close? Don't even think about it. The crown will not lose a single day. You'll be fine. Stick to the same dishes, only simpler. He turned to Nidita. What are our reservations for today? Nidita checked her tablet. 18 tables for dinner. 3 regulars, including Senator Harrison. Excellent. We'll manage. That night marked the beginning of the restaurant's downfall. Robert struggled to recreate Bram's signature dishes without the support of Liam and the other experienced chefs. The kitchen faltered. Orders were delayed, plates came out unevenly cooked, and the staff was visibly stressed. Senator Harrison, a distinguished gray-haired man known for his impeccable manners, returned his steak twice and called Nidita over. "My dear, what is going on?" he asked, concern in his voice. "I've been dining here every week for 20 years and I've never been this disappointed." Nidita glanced nervously at Tamsin, who was distracted chatting with other diners. "We're experiencing temporary difficulties. Bram is no longer with us," she explained. The senator's eyes widened. "But he's the soul of this place. What happened?" "New leadership, new vision," Nidita said diplomatically. The senator sighed. "I understand. I also heard Eris left the restaurant to her goddaughter. Is that true?" "Yes, but it's complicated," Nidita replied. He shook his head, disappointed. "Please give my regards to the chef and the check. I'm afraid I can't finish dinner tonight." Once he left, other guests equally dissatisfied followed. By the end of the evening, half the reserved tables sat empty, and the once celebrated Legacy Crown felt the first cracks in its foundation. Customers either left before finishing their meals or didn't show up at all, canceling reservations at the last minute. Tamsin was furious, storming over to Nidita as the final diners exited. "What is happening? Why are all these cancellations happening? And why are people complaining about the food?" Nidita rubbed her temples, exhausted. "Miss Niles, the Legacy Crown is a fine dining restaurant. Our regulars expect a high level of service and quality, and they notice when changes are made." Tamsin waved her hand dismissively. "Then we need new customers. Normal people who just want good food without all the pretense." She paused, her tone confident. "Reputation can be changed. Starting tomorrow we'll lower prices by 20% and run an ad in the local paper. I've already arranged it." Nidita knew arguing was useless. Tamsin refused to hear anything that went against her plan. That night, in her small apartment above Sweet Dreams Bakery, Karis received an unexpected visitor. Jarvis. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "I didn't know you lived here," he said, glancing around the modest space. Karis placed a cup of tea in front of him. "Temporary solution," she replied calmly. He cupped the mug as if drawing warmth from it. "The restaurant isn't going well," he admitted, his voice low. "It's complicated. Bram and several other chefs have resigned, and the customers are unhappy. Mom thinks it's temporary, but I'm not sure." Karis spoke quietly, almost matter-of-factly. "What did you expect, Jarvis? The Legacy Crown isn't just a building or a name. It's the people, the traditions, the reputation built over decades." Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, betraying his unease. "I know, Mom thought it would be easy. She's always wanted to own a restaurant, and this seemed like an opportunity to take someone else's inheritance." Karis looked at him steadily. "And she's destroying it in the process." Jarvis winced. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have given her the papers. That was wrong." Karis studied him, questioning whether his remorse was genuine. "What do you want from me, Jarvis?" she asked. He pleaded, "Help us. Talk to Bram. Convince him to come back. Or at least help us find a replacement chef. You have contacts." Karis shook her head firmly. "You don't understand. Bram won't return while your mother runs the restaurant. He respected Aries and her vision, and Tamsin is changing everything. She wants to turn the crown into something completely different. She's just trying to make it more affordable and profitable," Jarvis protested. Karis interrupted quietly but firmly, "at the cost of its quality and reputation. It won't work, Jarvis. It can't." The Legacy Crown had never been a place for ordinary diners. It was a restaurant for special occasions, for true food lovers, and for anyone willing to pay for exceptional quality. Jarvis sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I tried to explain it to Mom, but she won't listen. She thinks she knows best and you can't stand up to her." There was no question in his voice, only the quiet truth of a man long controlled by a domineering mother. He lowered his eyes, and that single gesture spoke more than words ever could. "I just want things to get better," he said softly. "I want the restaurant to succeed, and I want you to come home. I want things to go back to how they were." Karis studied him, her gaze steady. "Nothing will go back to how it was, Jarvis. Too much has changed." The next morning she met with Barclay Quinn at his office. The lawyer greeted her with a subtle look of satisfaction. "I hear the Legacy Crown isn't going well," he said, motioning for her to sit. "Yes," Karis agreed. Bram has left, customers are unhappy and Jarvis came to me for help. And what did you tell him? That nothing will ever be the same, she replied with a faint smile. But she wasn't there for discussion alone, she needed guidance. I need your advice on what to do next, the possible steps. Barkley leaned back, watching her closely. Do you want to regain control of the restaurant? Yes, but not just to take it back, she said. I want to create something new while honoring Aries' legacy. She opened a notebook. I've met with Bram, Nidita and other key staff. They're ready to work with me. I found a location near the old 4th Ward alley. It's smaller than the Crown but full of character. Stone walls, arched windows, and the owner is willing to rent with an option to buy. I want to open a new restaurant called Aries' Legacy, keeping the best traditions of the Crown but adding my own touch. Bram will be chef, Nidita the manager, and I'll need your help with funding. Barkley opened a file. Aries set up several assets separately from the restaurant. The wine cellar, worth over $200,000, is in a company where you're the sole shareholder. The professional kitchen equipment is also under your name through a leasing company. There's even an investment account for business development with around $300,000. She wanted to make sure you had the resources to grow. Karis listened, surprised and grateful. She hadn't known about the investment account, but it confirmed what she had always believed. Aries had thought of everything even after her passing. And no matter what happened at the main restaurant, Karis realized she could use the funds and assets to start her own venture. Legally, she had full access to the wine collection and kitchen equipment from the Legacy Crown. They belonged to her personally, not the restaurant itself. And the brand? The Legacy Crown name, the recipes, the concept, all were hers, registered under a company Aries had created and now fully controlled by Karis. The building itself was an independent asset, temporarily managed by Nidita, though without legal authority. A plan began to take shape. She could move the staff, the equipment, the wine, and the brand to a new location, leaving Tamsin with nothing but an empty shell. Meanwhile, at the Legacy Crown, chaos continued. Tamsin's advertising campaign drew new customers, but they weren't the ones the restaurant had been built for. Price-conscious diners were disappointed to find the food still too expensive. While longtime patrons, alarmed by Bram's departure and the menu changes, canceled reservations en masse. The wine list, once a signature feature, had been halved. Tamsin even ordered the sale of the most expensive bottles to boost cash flow. But when the sommelier tried to access the collection, only Karis had the keys and codes. On the 7th day after Bram left, journalists from a major food publication arrived to report on the Legacy Crown's transformation. Tamsin, oblivious to the danger, welcomed them eagerly. The Crown is being refreshed, she said, posing in the dining room. We're making the restaurant modern and more accessible to everyday Atlantans. Iris created a wonderful place, but time moves quickly. We need to evolve to stay relevant. The journalist, a sharp-eyed young man, scribbled notes and asked about Bram Cassidy, whose departure had stunned the culinary world. Tamsin waved it off. Bram is talented, but his vision didn't match ours. We want a chef who shares our approach to more democratic cuisine. Democratic? The journalist raised an eyebrow. Yes, Tamsin replied confidently. Simpler, straightforward dishes, less pretension, no fancy French terms, no tiny portions at outrageous prices. People just want to eat well. After the interview, the journalist ordered dinner, eager to see the changes for himself, while Karis silently watched the unfolding disaster from afar, her plan forming more clearly with every misstep. He ordered one of the few remaining Legacy Crown specialties. Lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash. Once a masterpiece under Bram, the dish now looked dull and uninspired. The journalist took a few photos, barely touched the food and left politely. 2 days later, the article was published, sealing the restaurant's fate. The headline read, "Crown in Free Fall: How Atlanta's Legendary Restaurant is Losing Its Glory." The piece detailed the staff departures, the decline in food and service, and Tamsin's changes, highlighting her comments about cuts and democratic cuisine, contrasting sharply with Aries Holloway's legacy of exceptional quality and refined fine dining. The story spread like wildfire online. Bloggers and food critics shared memories of the Crown under Aries and Bram, and a hashtag began trending. #SaveTheCrown y'all. When Jarvis showed Tamsin the article, she erupted in anger. "Snobs. All of them," she shouted, pacing the empty dining room. Who do they think they are, telling me how to run a restaurant? Jarvis tried to reason calmly. Mom, maybe we should rethink our approach. Maybe bring back the original concept and hire an experienced chef. Tamsin spun on him. You're against me too? She demanded. I just want the restaurant to survive, Jarvis said, exhausted. We're losing customers, money, and reputation. I don't need those snobby patrons. New ones will come who appreciate my vision, she snapped. But they didn't. Friday nights, usually packed, had only 3 couples. On the 9th day after Bram's departure, the final blow came. Men in suits arrived with documents. We represent the owner of the wine collection and kitchen equipment, they informed a stunned Tamsin. These assets can be seized at the owner's request. What owner? Tamsin cried, outraged. The premises are yours, Ms. Niles, but not the equipment or the wine. They belong to Miss Caris Monroe. That day the professional kitchen, refrigerators, wine cellar, and even some separate furniture were removed from the legacy crown. That evening, Jarvis found his mother sitting alone in the emptied restaurant, a bottle of whiskey in front of her, staring at the space she had so recklessly destroyed. It's over, Tamsin whispered, her voice flat and empty. Without the equipment we can't cook. Without the wine half our profits are gone. The staff is leaving one by one. Jarvis sat beside her at a loss for words. For the first time he saw his domineering, always confident mother completely defeated. We could buy new equipment, he suggested hesitantly. Tamsin laughed, bitter and hollow. With what money? Do you know how much a professional kitchen costs? And the wine collection, 30 years of careful curation, is gone. We've been outsmarted, Jarvis. Your wife was far more cunning than I realized. On the 10th day of Tamsin's takeover, a simple notice appeared on the door of the Legacy Crown, closed for renovations. But anyone who read it closely knew there would be no renovations. The legendary restaurant, the heart of Aries Holloway's life's work, had effectively ended, at least as Atlantans had known and loved it. Meanwhile, across the city in an old stone building with arched windows, work was buzzing on a new restaurant. Aries's legacy was being reborn, blending everything that had made the crown great with Caris's fresh ideas. That evening, as the Legacy Crown sat empty and silent, Caris's phone buzzed. Jarvis's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it, weighing her emotions. Part of her wanted to ignore him. Part of her was curious about what could have driven him to call now that the crown was finally closed. After the 5th ring, she answered calmly, her voice neutral. Hello. Caris. Jarvis's voice trembled with panic. Thank God you picked up. It's urgent. About what? She asked, her tone steady, though a small part of her relished the desperation in his voice. The crown, everything's collapsed, he said, sighing sharply. Mom's hysterical. The lawyers are talking bankruptcy, rent, vendor contracts, loans. She'll lose everything. You have to help. Caris remained quiet, letting him continue. She was seated in a small office at the back of the building where her new restaurant would open in just a week. Sample menus lay on the table, the result of days of planning with Bram. Caris, can you hear me? Jarvis pleaded, desperation in every word. This is a disaster. Mom invested in renovations, new furniture, even took a loan against her house. If the restaurant doesn't reopen, she'll lose it all. What can I do to help? Caris's voice stayed calm, almost measured. Can you? Jarvis hesitated, clearly unsure how to ask. Can you talk to Bram? Convince him to come back, help us find a new chef, or return the equipment and wine collection. Caris finished his thought for him. Yes. Relief and hope crept into his voice. Can you do it? Mom says she'll do whatever it takes. Jarvis admitted she had been wrong and acted too quickly, but Caris cut him off. I can't return the equipment or the wine, she said firmly. Everything has already been moved to the new location. Alarm crept into Jarvis's voice. New location? What are you talking about? Caris took a slow breath, wishing this conversation could have been in person instead of over the phone. I'm opening a new restaurant, Jarvis. Aries's legacy. Bram, Nidita, and most of the original staff are with me. Silence stretched on the line, then came a broken laugh, tinged with disbelief. So while Mom and I were trying to save the Legacy Crown, you were planning your own place, taking our staff and equipment? Jarvis said, voice trembling. I didn't take anything illegally, Caris replied, calm but firm. Everything is mine by law. The staff left because they didn't want to work under your mother. They chose to follow me. You planned this from the start, Jarvis accused. No, Karis said honestly. At first I was shocked by what you did, then angry, and finally I understood. Ares's legacy isn't the building or the name. It's the people, the traditions, the recipes, everything she built over 30 years. And your mother nearly destroyed all of that in 10 days. Silence fell, and Karis imagined him pacing the empty restaurant, struggling to comprehend the damage. I need to see you, he finally said. I need to talk in person. Where are you? Karis hesitated briefly, then gave the address, warning, if you bring your mother or lawyers I won't talk. He promised he would come alone. 20 minutes later the doorbell rang and Jarvis appeared, disheveled, exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usually neat appearance in disarray. Karis watched him quietly from the threshold, taking in the scene, the fading Atlanta sunset spilling across the cobblestone street outside her new restaurant, the lanterns casting a warm, inviting glow over a place ready to honor tradition while embracing new beginnings. The new restaurant wasn't officially open yet, but most of the work was complete. Natural stone walls, exposed wooden beams, and tall, arched windows gave the space a warm, timeless feel, almost like stepping into a quiet sanctuary. Wooden tables with crisp white tablecloths, the same ones used at the Legacy Crown, filled the center of the room, and at the back a glass-doored wine cellar displayed bottles from Ares's famous collection, sparkling under the soft light. Come in, Karis said, gesturing to Jarvis. Be careful, some of the cables aren't hidden yet. He stepped slowly inside, his eyes scanning the familiar furniture, photos of Ares on the walls and glimpses of the kitchen through the half-open door. So this is it, he said quietly, awe and disbelief in his voice. All this time you were planning this? This? Karis asked calmly. Yes, he replied. Do you want coffee? The kitchen's running already. Jarvis nodded, still stunned, and she led him to a small office where they could talk privately. Bram, busy in the kitchen, gave a respectful nod but didn't interrupt the sauce he was stirring. Sitting with cups of coffee, Jarvis finally asked, Why didn't you tell me you were opening your own restaurant? Karis raised an eyebrow. Would you have listened after taking the documents and giving them to your mother? Jarvis looked down. I did a terrible thing. I know. Mom was persuasive. She said you couldn't handle it, that the crown would fail under your management, and this was her chance to fulfill her dream. But I believed her more than you. Karis shook her head slowly. At first I was devastated by your betrayal. 6 years of marriage and you sided with your mother so easily. He sighed softly. It wasn't easy. I agonized, couldn't sleep, especially when you didn't come home or answer your phone. Karis's voice was steady, measured. Even when it became clear your mother was destroying the restaurant, you still did nothing. Jarvis rubbed his face, frustrated. I tried to talk to her. I really did. But she's stubborn. She never admits mistakes, never listens to anyone. And, you know, I've obeyed her all my life. Karis met his gaze, not with anger but with quiet regret. You know, this restaurant crisis didn't change anything. It only confirmed what was already true about our marriage. You could never stand up to your mother, not even for me, Karis said quietly. Jarvis looked up, his eyes heavy with guilt and pain. I love you, Karis. I've always loved you, he admitted. I know, she replied softly, but love alone isn't always enough. You have to have the courage to stand by the person you love, even when it's hard. Silence fell for a moment as Jarvis absorbed her words. Then he asked the question that weighed on him the most. What about us, Karis? Can our marriage survive this? Karis took a steady breath. She had been asking herself the same thing for days. Did she still love him? Could she forgive his betrayal? And was it even possible to rebuild trust? I don't know, she said honestly. Right now my focus is the restaurant. That has to be my priority. Our relationship needs time and space to see if it can be rebuilt. Do you want a divorce? His voice wavered with pain. I want clarity, she answered firmly. These past weeks showed me how much influence your mother had over our marriage. I cannot go back to what we had. If we are to be together, it has to be something new, based on equality and respect. Jarvis nodded slowly, accepting her words. And Mom, he asked. She's desperate. Karis straightened. That's her choice. She could have done the right thing, acknowledged I owned the restaurant and tried to work with me. Instead, she chose deceit and manipulation, and now she faces the consequences. You're not going to help her? Not even a little? He asked hesitantly. Karis paused, feeling a mix of resolve and curiosity. She wasn't pleased about Tamsin's desperation, but she understood the importance of fairness and reputation. I'll see what I can do, she said finally. Maybe we can reach an agreement on the building, but I won't go back there, and I will not allow Eris's name or recipes to be used. That's non-negotiable. Jarvis exhaled, relief visible on his face. Thank you, Karis. I know you don't have to, but this means a lot. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not doing it for you or your mother. I'm doing it to protect Ares's legacy. She deserves better than scandal or litigation. Jarvis stood, looking around the new restaurant with fresh appreciation. When's the opening? He asked. In a week, she said. A soft opening for select guests, then the official launch. He hesitated. You will invite me? Karis looked at him, noting the hope and uncertainty in his expression. See. A lot depends on what you do in the coming days. When he left, Karis sat back in her office, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed. A month ago, her world had been predictable: her bakery, her marriage, quiet dinners with Ares. Now, she was the owner of a new restaurant, her marriage was fragile, and her relationship with Tamsin was evolving into something she never expected, something more honest and respectful. A knock at the door pulled Karis from her thoughts. It was Bram. Ms. Monroe, he said, still formal despite the weeks they had worked together. I finished the main menu and I'd like to go over a few details with you. Karis smiled, setting aside her personal reflections. Of course, Bram. And please call me Karis. We're partners now. The chef nodded, a small smile softening his usually serious expression. How did the conversation with your husband go? He asked, laying the menu sheets on the table. Better than I expected, Karis replied honestly. He finally understands what happened and seems to recognize his mistake. His mother. She's more complicated. Karis sighed. She invested in the legacy crown, took out loans, and now it could all be gone. Bram let out a short chuckle. She got what she deserved. Ares would be turning in her grave if she saw what that woman did. I know, Karis admitted, but I don't want our success to come at someone else's expense, even if they've made mistakes. Maybe there's a way to handle it without giving up what matters to us. Bram studied her for a moment. You're very much like Ares, he said. She always found solutions that didn't burn bridges, even with people who didn't deserve it. The word struck Karis. To carry on Ares's legacy, not only in the kitchen but in the way she treated people, was the highest praise she could imagine. Thank you, Bram, she said softly. That really means a lot. They turned their attention to the menu, diving into the details as Karis set aside her personal concerns. There was still so much to do before the grand opening, and she was determined to make a restaurant that Ares would have been proud of. Later that night, just as she was preparing to leave, her phone rang. Barclay Quinn's name flashed on the screen. Ms. Monroe, the lawyer's voice was calm and professional. I have news about the Legacy Crown building. A restaurant group from New York has made an offer. They want to enter the Atlanta market and are prepared to pay a good price. Karis paused. Selling the building could resolve many financial issues, but something made her hesitate. Could I have until tomorrow to consider it? She asked. There's an idea I want to discuss with you first. Of course, Barclay agreed. I'll be in the office from 9 a.m., Barclay had said, and Karis let the thought settle as she stood in the middle of her nearly finished restaurant. The sunset streamed through the arched windows, casting long shadows on the stone walls and giving the space a warmth that made it feel alive. Ares's legacy was already taking shape, forming its own identity while honoring the best traditions of the Legacy Crown. A risky but promising idea came to her mind. Instead of selling the Crown building, she could offer Tamsin a lease to open a completely new restaurant there, one with a fresh name and concept, designed for a broader audience. This would allow Tamsin to pursue her dream without destroying what Ares had built. It would require humility and an admission of mistakes, things Karis knew Tamsin struggled with, but sometimes necessity forced people to change. Karis smiled at the thought. Ares had always said that running a restaurant wasn't just about cooking exquisite dishes. It was about finding solutions that left a pleasant outcome for everyone involved. Perhaps she had found exactly that solution. Feeling a rare surge of optimism, Karis left the restaurant knowing that no matter what Tamsin chose or how her relationship with Jarvis developed, Aries' legacy would become her own triumph. A place where she could express her talent and vision while continuing the work of her beloved godmother. The morning of the grand opening dawned sunny and clear over Atlanta, a rare gift for the city. Karis arrived before 7 a.m., wanting the quiet calm of the restaurant before the day began. Over the past week, the space had been transformed. The cold stone walls were now adorned with antique photos of old Atlanta streets and portraits of Aries at different stages of her life. In the center, a bouquet of fresh flowers, lavender and wild herbs, Aries' favorite, brightened the room. The polished wooden tables were dressed with crisp white tablecloths, the cutlery gleamed and the crystal glasses sparkled, reflecting the refined elegance that had made the legacy crown legendary. Karis walked slowly through the dining room, adjusting chairs and checking table arrangements before peeking into the kitchen, where Bram and his team were quietly preparing for the evening. The chef greeted her with a respectful smile, not interrupting the sauce he was tending. Everything is on track. Nidita appeared at her side, clipboard in hand. 24 confirmed reservations. The wine is ready from the cellar. Menus are printed. Staff will be ready by 5. Karis nodded, grateful for their unwavering support over the past weeks. Without Bram and Nidita's experience, she wouldn't have been able to pull this off in such a short time. How do you feel? Nidita asked, studying her closely. Ready for the big day? Yes, and no, Karis admitted honestly. I've been waiting for this moment, but I'm nervous. Eris built her reputation over 30 years, and I'm just her goddaughter, coming from a small bakery. Nidita placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Eris saw things in you that even you don't see yet. She never made decisions lightly, especially when it came to her life's work. And neither should you. If she chose you to succeed her, she had complete confidence in your abilities, Nidita said, and Karis felt a surge of reassurance. She took a deep breath and smiled, the weight of doubt lifting slightly. Thank you, Nidita. It's time to stop hesitating and focus on what needs to be done. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations. Karis moved through the restaurant, checking every detail, from the table arrangements and lighting to the temperature of the wine and the crisp uniforms of the staff. She wanted the first night of Aries' legacy to be flawless. At 4 p.m., just an hour before the opening, a knock at the door made her start slightly. Through the glass, she saw Jarvis holding a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. Gone was his business suit. He wore jeans and a blue shirt, a faint stubble on his face. Karis hesitated, then opened the door. Hello, he said softly. I know you're busy, but I wanted to see you before the opening and wish you luck. He offered the flowers and Karis accepted them, her feelings mixed. Part of her still remembered his betrayal, yet part appreciated the gesture. Thank you, she said quietly. I didn't expect to see you today. I won't stay for the opening, he added quickly. I know it might be awkward with the staff. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. What you've accomplished in such a short time is remarkable. Karis studied him, trying to read his sincerity. Admiration? Guilt? Or a subtle attempt to make amends? She shifted the conversation. How's your mother? Jarvis's expression darkened. Not well. He's still in shock. She poured all her savings into the crown, and now she's left with debts and an empty building. I've been talking to Barkley about possible solutions. Karis nodded. There's a buyer interested, a restaurant group from New York, but I have another idea. Jarvis raised an eyebrow. What's that? Tamsin can lease the space at a fair price, Karis explained. Not to continue the legacy crown, that name stays with me, but to create a new restaurant with her own concept. She wanted something more democratic, and this lets her do that without destroying the legacy. Jarvis's mouth opened slightly in surprise. You'd do that after everything she did? Karis shrugged. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it because it's what Aries would have done. She always looked for solutions that worked for everyone. Jarvis shook his head in quiet amazement. You are extraordinary, Karis. Only now do I fully understand it. His voice softened. I finally had a serious conversation with Mom, the first in years. I told her that her manipulation ruined our marriage and almost destroyed my life. I won't let her control me anymore. Karis studied him intently. And her reaction? She asked. At first she was furious, he admitted with a weak smile. Blamed you for everything, called me ungrateful. But after the anger faded, I think she began to understand. At least she admitted she had acted too quickly with the restaurant and should have taken more time to understand the business before making sweeping changes. That's progress, Karis said quietly. Yes, Jarvis replied thoughtfully. By the way, I got an apartment. I realized we both need space and I need to learn to live on my own without Mom's influence. Karis was genuinely surprised. It was a brave step for Jarvis, who had spent his entire life living with or close to his mother. I'm happy for you, she said sincerely. It's an important step. They shared a quiet moment, a silence heavier with understanding than most of their previous conversations. I have to go, Jarvis said finally. You have a big night ahead and I wanted to let you know I'm working on myself. I hope someday you can trust me again. He turned toward the door but Karis called after him. Jarvis, tell your mother that my offer to lease the building is still on the table. She can contact Barkley if she's interested. He nodded, gratitude in his eyes, and left, leaving Karis alone with the bouquet of white roses and a swirl of mixed feelings. Exactly at 5 o'clock, the doors of Aries' legacy opened to its first guests. Among them were longtime friends of Aries, loyal patrons of the legacy crown, respected food critics and members of the press. Karis personally welcomed each guest, feeling a mix of excitement and calm, as if her godmother were silently supporting her. The evening's menu honored Aries Holloway, blending her classic dishes with new creations developed alongside Bram. Each plate came with a small card explaining its story or a memory of Aries' life. Once the guests were seated, Karis stood to speak. Good evening, she began, and the room grew quiet. Thank you for joining us for this special occasion. Aries' legacy is more than a restaurant. It is the continuation of my godmother Aries Holloway's work, who taught me that food nourishes both the body and the soul. He paused, letting the words sink in. 30 years ago, Aries opened a small cafe that grew into the legendary legacy crown. Tonight we start a new chapter in that story. We honor the traditions and quality that made the crown famous, while adding our own vision. As Aries always said, honor the past but look to the future. That is the principle we follow. Guests nodded, raising glasses in agreement. Karis continued, Chef Bram Cassidy and his team will present dishes that celebrate the soul of Southern cuisine with a modern twist. Each dish tells a story, carries character, and we hope those stories resonate with you as they do with us. She lifted her glass. To Aries Holloway, whose passion and love for people inspired us all, and to new beginnings that preserve the best of the past. Applause filled the room and the dinner began. One dish after another appeared, each a work of art. Lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash, Aries' famous fish recipe updated with modern touches, and desserts created by Karis herself, including her signature lavender and honey cake. Critics took notes, photographers snapped pictures, and guests shared enthusiastic smiles and comments, the evening unfolding as a perfect tribute to a legacy reborn. Karis moved from table to table throughout the evening, listening carefully to feedback, sharing stories about Aries, and answering questions about the restaurant's future plans. By the end of the night, it was obvious that the opening of Aries' legacy had been a complete success. Journalists promised glowing reviews, critics hinted at potential Michelin stars, and loyal legacy crown patrons expressed their joy that the spirit of their beloved restaurant had been preserved. By the time the last guest left, it was well past midnight. The staff, exhausted but elated, celebrated quietly. Even Bram allowed himself a broad smile, accepting congratulations from his team for the first time in years. We did it, Nidita said to Karis as they stood alone in the empty hall. Aries would be proud. This is just the beginning, Karis replied, her voice carrying confidence and anticipation rather than worry. The following day, news of the restaurant's opening appeared in every local newspaper and on food blogs, with excellent reviews and a rush of reservations that kept the phone ringing non-stop. About a week later, Karis received an unexpected visit. Tamsin Niles, dressed in a muted gray suit instead of her usual bright ensembles, appeared quietly between lunch and dinner, when the restaurant was nearly empty. May I speak with the owner? She asked Nita, who led her to Karis's office. Karis greeted her mother-in-law politely, keeping her tone calm. Tamsin gestured to the chair across from her and sat down, smoothing her skirt, her expression unusually subdued. "I came to talk about your offer," she began, hesitating. "The lease for the Crown building." Karis nodded, waiting. "At first I wanted to refuse," Tamsin admitted. "Pride wouldn't let me accept help from someone I've treated poorly." "I understand," Karis replied, her tone even and patient. "But then I looked at the empty building, counted the debts, and realized I had no other choice." Tamsin gave a faint smile. "And Jarvis helped me see things differently. He reminded me that I had always dreamed of owning my own restaurant, but I was trying to take someone else's dream instead of creating my own." Karis was struck by Tamsin's honesty and self-reflection. It was rare to hear such candid words from a woman usually so forceful. "What have you decided?" Karis asked. Tamsin took a breath and said, "I would like to accept your offer." Tamsin explained that she planned to open a new restaurant in the Crown building under a different name and concept. Something more approachable for everyday people, a bistro serving good home-style cooking at fair prices. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Karis said sincerely. "That neighborhood could really use a place like this." Tamsin nodded, then added with visible effort, "I also want to apologize for how I treated you over the years, for what I did with Eris's inheritance. I acted out of jealousy and ambition without thinking about the consequences." Karis was taken aback. She had never heard her mother-in-law offer a genuine apology before. "I appreciate your words," she replied after a thoughtful pause. "And I'm ready to move forward without holding a grudge." Tamsin looked genuinely relieved. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Jarvis is really worried about your marriage. He's truly changing. For the first time in years, I see determination and independence in him." Karis remained silent, unwilling to discuss her marriage with Tamsin, even with this humbler version of her mother-in-law. "I'm not interfering," Tamsin quickly added, sensing her hesitation. "I just wanted you to know he's sincerely sorry and working to be a better person." After Tamsin left, Karis stayed in her office, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed in just a month. A small bakery, a quiet marriage with Jarvis, occasional dinners with Aries, all that had shifted. Now she owned a thriving restaurant, her marriage was uncertain, and her relationship with Tamsin had taken a new, more respectful turn. That evening, as diners filled the room, Karis stood at the bar watching her team at work. Bram directed the kitchen with precision and care. Nidita oversaw the service, moving gracefully between tables, and the wait staff, sommeliers, and assistants worked in seamless coordination. "This is your legacy, Eris," Karis thought, quietly addressing her godmother. "Not just the recipes or the restaurant, but the people and the spirit you brought together. I promise to preserve and build on what you created." At that moment, Edward, the sommelier, approached her with a bottle of wine, a small smile on his face and the weight of the evening's success hanging in the air. "Miss Monroe," Edward said with a respectful smile, "the guest at table 5 asked me to give you this. It's Eris's favorite wine, she always saved it for special occasions."